Today, we're going to be talking about myth-busting AI, and we're between Morty and Brian here, who are part of our expert panel, if you would. Brian's going to be giving us an initial presentation here for about 15 minutes or so. Then we're going to go into a discussion round between Morty, Brian, myself, and we're just going to talk about that topic, and then we're going to open it up for everybody to join into the conversation. So would really love to hear any questions that you guys have. Feel free to make any, comments as we get going into that component of it. So first off, thank you guys for keeping all your cameras on. That makes a much better event, much, more engaging for our speakers and then ultimately our audience, because we record these and then we cast them all back out there for everybody. So thanks again for joining us. Couple little things just to keep in mind while we're giving the presentation, and you guys, looks like you've already all done that. Keep your mics muted just so we don't have interruptions. And then once we get into the overall conversation, we'll have everybody raise your hand if you want to ask a question. But since this is a kind of a small group, we'll be able to interact and engage with each other very nicely. So I'm going to hand it over to Brian. I'll let you get started. I'm going to make sure that you have screen share. There you go. So in addition, one last thing, why don't you guys go ahead and put your name and where you're from, just so we kind of have a record of that. I always like to see where people are coming in from on our calls. So Brian, the floor is yours.
All right. Can everybody see this?
Still pulling up.
Okay. I may have a glitch. I might have to come and rejoin this. Give me 1 second.
Okay, no problem. We'll just talk about you while you're gone.
Probably have permissions.
Yeah, I'll stop the sharing there. There we go.
While Brian's getting that pulled up, just so that we have some really solid material here near the end. When a question comes to you, comes to mind, you can either write it down, or you can just drop it in the chat. If you're brave enough to do the raise hand thing, and you're totally cool with having your face out there to be a celebrity, you can do that. Or if you want to just drop it in the chat, if you're a little bit more nervous, that's fine too.
There we go.
Looking better?
You're live.
All right. Well, thanks everybody. My name is Brian Sampson. I'm the founder and president of 10 Forward Consulting. We're a small development shop, custom development here in Madison, Wisconsin. I've had experience with AI since college. I had some early classes back in the early 2000s on machine learning and neural networks. And then it's just been very exciting for me to kind of follow the topic throughout the last few decades, especially this last year when everything has just been going absolutely crazy. Everybody's talking about ChatGPT. We finally seem to have hit a tipping point where this technology is looking like it's going to be accessible to everyone instead of just to a limited group of, specialized engineers with specialized expensive hardware and things like that and specialized training. And so kind of the topic of today is we just wanted to talk about a couple of different myths that people have and ideas that they have about AI and separate truth from fiction. So just really quick to get started on what AI is. Obviously, it stands for artificial intelligence. And I think the first myth that everybody has is this is actually intelligent. We're exposed to a lot of sci-fi programming. We're exposed to a lot of things. We've seen 2001 and HAL and all these different kind of ideas in the media for what AI actually is. But the way that we currently use AI is it is not truly intelligence. It is more about identifying patterns and predicting outcomes. And using that very kind of simple concept, we've actually been able to accomplish very impressive things. I mean, ChatGPT, they just rolled out their vision, their multimodal platform. So now they can listen to audio, they can look at video, they can look at pictures. You can say, what is this plant? And it will predict what the plant is, and it gets it right more often than not, which is actually really impressive. If anybody's interested a little bit more, this is one of my favorite books on the topic, if I can get that off of the Zoom, called Prediction Machines by Ajay Agrawal. He wrote this in 2018 and then came out with a revised in 2022. That's a typo. But it's a very accessible book. It doesn't get too much into the technical, and it focuses mostly on the economics of AI and how to apply it at your business. And his kind of key takeaway is that, it's not this magic wand. It is a prediction machine. And given enough data, it is able to notice patterns in a way that we, kind of humans take for granted our pattern matching abilities. And AI has gone really far in being able to predict what these outcomes are. So just quick example, I did some consulting for a couple of years over at American Family and worked with their data science group. This was 2020, 2021. And we utilized artificial intelligence. We trained our own models. This is pre-ChatGPT. So we had to train everything in-house on purchased hardware with data scientists in-house. But we were able to streamline certain types of insurance claims, and we could predict basically which ones that we thought were going to get paid out at the cap limit, right? So like if your basement floods, a lot of times there's a $5,000 or a $10,000 limit. And applying this technology to that use case and then a handful of other ones, we were able to get the average time to settlement down from over 2 weeks to less than 2 days for the types of claims that we handled. And so everybody loves that. Obviously, it's cheaper. Customers love it. They get their claims settled quicker. And the important thing is that we did it without losing accuracy, right? Like you can pay those claims right away and close them out immediately. But if you're doing it by just writing checks, it's not going to be good for the business. And so we went through 3 audits in the 9 months that we were there before we officially launched the project in the proof of concept phase, and came out that we were better than or equal to human adjusters in those cases. And so that kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about next is, GPT particularly, and some of these other AI demos, they demo really well and they look very interesting. And when people kind of pick up this technology off the street, they just go to asking it questions about things that are facts, right? Like, can we replace Google with this? Or can you answer this question for me? Or can you have some kind of discussion or whatever? And the AI will almost always give an actual answer. And those answers need to be vetted for accuracy. So at AmFam, like I said, we treated this software that we had built kind of like a new employee, right? Like we let it go for a couple months and then we went and did an audit, and then we let it go for another couple months and we did a performance review. So this machine that we built, this prediction machine, was not anything that was guaranteed and it's so much better and it's so much faster. It still needs to be managed, it still needs to be monitored, and you still need to vet it for accuracy before you rely on it. Just like you wouldn't rely on any one individual, you shouldn't rely on any one AI model. And then kind of similar to that, some of the demos people see make it seem like AI is aware and we are in full Skynet mode here, and it's not, right? We're not there. Like they're very sophisticated parroting machines. And the ones that we have now, these large language models and some of these other things, have so much data in there that they will have no problem making up an answer. They will have no problem giving you an answer, but it might or might not be true. It might just be the most likely next kind of string of words. So when we were at the insurance company, we trained those models internally based on data that we had from across the enterprise for years. And so that turns out, if you can do that, and there are ways to do that with kind of modern, consumer or prosumer business facing AI models, you can fine tune them with your company's own data and then get them much more accurate than if you're just asking a generalized large language model for information about, anything it would have randomly pulled from the internet, right? So I think this is probably one of the biggest ones, is AI is going to take all of the jobs. And, I'm not going to deny that I truly believe that this is a disruptive technology, particularly, I've seen the effects of it across industries over the past decade or more. But now that we've really hit this point where this technology is going to be accessible to every company out there for much cheaper, it's like the advent of the personal computer instead of the ones that took up a room. And did that, when we started getting desktop computers, did that affect jobs? Absolutely. It certainly got rid of certain classes of jobs, but overall, it did not increase unemployment across the board. It required retraining of people. Like people need to stop using typewriters and learn Microsoft Word. And it took a little while, but everybody pretty much did that. And so this is from a survey from McKinsey that says most employers that they surveyed expect little or no change or small decreases in total staff, like headcount, over the next 3 years. But they expect that, at least 20% like the majority of them think that a significant portion of their workforce is going to need to be retrained. And I think this is where the power of AI comes in and is so interesting once you get it away from just, the toolbox of the engineers, which is where it's been for the last 15 years. And if you can put people who have this deep domain knowledge, right, like we did at American Family, people who had been working in claims for years and who knew the right questions to ask and who knew the data to pull, we were able to be very effective in, producing this product. And, it didn't replace any jobs there, but it just made everybody's jobs easier, right? If you're an adjuster and you get something from our system that says, hey, this one should probably be paid out, we did not go so far as to have the machine automatically pay anything out. We always had to go kick over to the team. And that's why it took 2 days instead of 2 minutes. But we didn't want to make mistakes, right? It's a very risk averse company. Insurance is risk averse by definition. And so we just used it as like a great team member. And so could we replace, a team of adjusters with a couple of highly trained adjuster managers who are managing AIs for these different cases? And let me be clear, like for the 5 different cases that we had 5 different models. It was not a generalized system. It took quite a bit of engineering to get in there, but that was the way that we were able to keep it accurate, was treating those AI models almost as if they were people, almost as if they were employees, giving them specialized training and then having them do that job really well. Next up, AI is a magic wand. So I hear this all the time, right? People are like, Brian, we're so excited about AI. Like, how can we feed our schedules into ChatGPT and have it just spit out, this amazing result like right away? It looks like it would work. Obviously that's kind of a leading question of a myth, because AI is not a magic wand and it will not solve all of our problems. Instead, what you need to think about is adopting an entire framework for how you bring AI into your business. And that, I found this diagram also from McKinsey, and they take an inside out approach. And I really like this idea, right? So you start by identifying these concrete use cases rather than saying, hey, can we ask ChatGPT to just help us out with, whatever? The answer is no. What you want to do is find a specific use case where you hopefully already do have data. Ideally, you know what the right answer is, and you can tell if the model is correct or not, so that then you can go and feed back into it to make sure that it's getting smarter over time. And then very specific predictions, right? So rather than looking at intelligence, if you can say, can you predict when a claim should be paid out quickly because it's very likely to hit, the max coverage limit? That's a pretty straightforward question for an AI, and we were able to get it to be very accurate. And if you tried to do something like, help this person, bring in all of the correct forms, right? Like it's going to be too vague, it's going to be too out there. And so you really need to find something that's specific. And so identifying these use cases is kind of the first step. And then identifying what data you have around that, right? So these LLMs that we can get off the shelf now, they're very good at doing things that require sounding like a person, or at least sounding like a person who writes on the internet, or identifying really common things, but they're not going to have data that is proprietary to your business. I mean, hopefully. And being able to have some data that says, okay, we've done this manufacturing run, 1 million times over the past 10 years. And we know that if, when there's a defect, we can tell, and we currently look at it using just human eyeballs. That might be a really good use case to apply a computer vision model, which, like I said, ChatGPT can do right now and is making it much, much more economical for you to adopt at your business. But some specific use case like that, where you would be able to feed it, 1,000 images and say, these are the defective ones and these are not, that's going to get you much better results if you have that data backing those use cases. And then from there, it just expands, right? Like getting into workflow integrations and opening your culture and your organization up to saving that data, processing it back through. I think those are kind of longer term frameworks, but I think this is where the big promise of AI productivity is in these late workflow and open organization phases. And it's going to take your company a while to get there if you've never dabbled in AI so far. And then my last slide, you can't have a myths of AI discussion without talking a little bit about ethics. And so a lot of people, they see this technology and they're like, wow, this is really cool. We should start using it everywhere. Obviously, there's a lot of people that have ethical concerns and legal concerns. A lot of these large language models and ChatGPT and some of these other big open ones are trained on everything they could find on the internet, regardless if it was copyrighted, regardless if it was someone else's, regardless of if they had permission. If it could read it, it read it. And, I think that is a big question, is like, certainly you don't want your own company data, your own private corporate data going in to feed these algorithms and to feed these other models so that other people can take advantage of your proprietary data. But do you want to be taking advantage of other people's data that you might not have their permission from? And I think this gets particularly dicey when you get into images as opposed to just text, or once it starts generating music, for example. So it's not very difficult, by the way, if you've ever played around with some of the image generation things like DALL-E 2. It's not very difficult to get it to generate images that have watermarks on them from Shutterstock or something like that, which is just a funny artifact because that's what it thinks images look like, because it was trained on watermarked images from across the internet. And so its opinion of what an image of people working in an office looks like, more often than not, those have watermarks on it. And so sometimes it'll generate those little artifacts. That is another thing that you get by doing some of this yourself. And I think that there's going to be a real opportunity for rolling your own or tweaking or fine tuning these models on your own business, on your own data, so that you have more control over the corpus of data that went into it. So I think that is about time, but I think,
Fantastic.
yeah. So any questions or?
Brian, thank you. Marty, I'd love to get you involved in this conversation and just kind of you come at this from a different perspective as a IT service provider. Give me just somewhat of an overview and maybe highlight a couple of points that you feel like were important from what Brian just went through.
Yeah, thank you. I'd say that Brian's observation that this is a prediction machine, from our perspective, is absolutely right, which basically means that predictions, just like human predictions and predicting the weather, can be wrong no matter how much data you put into it, because we're dealing with a much larger data set of the future, which is essentially infinite, because any permutation can happen. And what we don't know, we don't know what we don't know. So you can't predict on something you don't know. No one necessarily would have predicted COVID 3 years ago or 4 years ago, right? It's already almost 2024. So that's the first thing. And then the idea of reliance, I thought, was also interesting. As we start to use these machines more and more, we become more and more reliant on them. But that also means that we assume that their decision-making capability is as capable of a human, which then drives the interesting question, like, if we're adding in a machine and we are retooling the people, is it a savings or is it opportunistic? Like, how are we really trying to think about the business and what could be done there? And that goes back to what Brian mentioned with the McKinsey studies about, it almost seems like they think that this is a doing more with less play than it is opportunistic growth or completely shrinking down the workforce. So it's really just kind of status quo, but being able to output more. But maybe I'm thinking about that incorrectly. I'm just, throwing that out there.
I found it really fascinating, Brian, what you had to say about how the AI learns, and that we basically are training it and that it's producing artifacts on images and stuff like that, because to your point, I mean, it's not an intelligent thing. We are educating it based off of an existing thing. It's not creating new things, right? So question for both of you is, what AI capabilities that exist today get you most excited about the future potential of AI? Marty, I'll let you go first.
So it's interesting. I like AI on a number of different levels. On a very basic level, I think that for people who otherwise, like myself, have trouble communicating, particularly in a written format, being able to have AI spit out something that you can then use as an inspiration or check yourself on, this is taking a Grammarly or something like that to a whole next level. And that could really be useful for people who otherwise struggle or English isn't their first language. A lot of people like that in the world. The second thing is, again, just a today type of thing. If you're running a project and you're looking to do something, an LLM can potentially tell you what steps it thinks should be in that project and what you need to do in order to get from A to Z. Maybe you didn't think of 3 or 4 or 5 of those things in the middle. I think that that's just a worthwhile exercise without divulging anything particular about what you're doing or how you're doing it, just as a, litmus test. And it can also help many people think through an issue. Again, maybe this is just me. I find that different people think differently. And if you are self-aware, another back to the intelligence question, if you're self-aware, how do you think about thinking through a problem? So giving you the thinking points, if you will. And I'll pass the mic back.
Yeah, from a programming standpoint, Brian, what gets you most excited about AI's potential?
Well, so I would like to reiterate what Morty said, because I have used ChatGPT to help me get over writer's block. I'm always bad, and we've used it for clients. When we're making a new website and they need an about us page and they need something like that. I've known for very many years that if you throw them an empty design that's full of lorem ipsum filler text, and then you say, hey, client, can you please write all the content for me, and then we'll put it on your website, they'll never do it. And so for years, I've been just writing bad copy and sending it to them, knowing that they're going to be like, Brian, what are you doing? This is no good. And then they'll be motivated to fix it. And so now I just kind of have ChatGPT write the bad copy first, and then they hop in and they're like, oh, no, we're not 3 people, we're 30 people. Or no, our founder isn't so-and-so, it was somebody else. And then you can go through, but you use it as a framework, for building out these things. And so I think that that's extremely powerful. From a programming standpoint, our team has been using GitHub's Copilot software to help automatically generate code snippets while we're editing code. And we've had mixed to positive results with that. Sometimes if you're doing something that's really common and really kind of boilerplate, it can save an enormous amount of time. But it definitely is not code that you could just execute, right? It makes mistakes way more often than ChatGPT does when it's generating code. One interesting thing that I did find is we had a client who was doing research into NCAA, like D1 schools, and some of the technology that they were using on their different websites. And I asked ChatGPT to go give me a list of, the top 50 schools in the country, along with their team name and their athletics website. And it spit out a big list. And I was like, okay, hey, can you actually do that in like a CSV? And it spit out a CSV, and I was able to import that into a program and then go run, some automated scans. And I think there was only one of those 50 that it generated that wasn't the correct address for the school, right? I think it messed up.
Wow.
But it's pretty good. And again, right, this is information that there's tons of on the internet. It's very good at coming up with things like that. And I think that kind of stuff, automating away some of the real, because that would have taken me, an hour to do. And instead it took less than 2 minutes, right? And got it in the format that I needed for the program that I was writing. So
yeah, it's brilliant. Morty, how can business leaders evaluate if their data infrastructure is ready to support initiatives?
Maybe I come at it from a slightly different perspective, because we haven't really been putting in infrastructure in a long, long time. So if cloud is your infrastructure and you're going cloud first, your infrastructure is almost ready. The question is people and culture, and how do you train the people to use it, and how do you think about it, and how you think about it from a security perspective, and what you're putting when, where, and how, and then that drives the whole other cloud security conversation.
So how can companies identify AI skill gaps in their workforce and then fill those gaps?
Is that for me or for Brian?
Either one of you. Brian, go ahead. You can start.
Yeah, I would say the biggest thing that I would recommend is to experiment with some of this stuff. Like, figure out a use case, find a specific business problem that you think you can solve, and then bring somebody in to help do that. And the skill gaps will start to notice. Like, we don't know, this is changing every month, every couple months, every quarter, certainly every year. And so I don't think that I'm in a position to, to predict what the new job titles are going to be in 5 years, but I can guarantee that there will be new job titles that are not programming jobs, but are technical jobs. Basically operating, prompt engineer is something that has come up recently, where just having a person who knows how to ask specific questions. I read a whole white paper on this about how ChatGPT's predictions and some of its fact finding was improved a lot just by asking it to say what steps it was going to do first and then do those steps. Because sometimes if you just ask it for the answer, it just skips right ahead to producing a likely answer. But you could engineer it so that you would say, hey, what are the first 5 steps towards finding out, who the top 50 NCAA websites are? And then it would list out steps, and then you would say, okay, now go do those steps. And just changing that, someone discovered, increased the accuracy of the responses like significantly.
And
Morty, what do you think?
onto that end, I would think that I would not be surprised if shifts in the C-suite titles would change over the next little bit, and if a chief AI officer may exist, or maybe that's subsumed under the chief technology officer. People were talking about, just a year ago, I was hearing that, people are getting a little less interested in security, and that was going to drop off the CEO's radar. Perhaps that's something that may not happen if technology takes a quantum leap forward and it shifts into using compute in a very different way.
If a business has not gotten into AI for whatever reason, like they've said, nope, we're not digging into it, none of our employees can, how far behind is a company from a technology standpoint by not at least investigating and seeing how AI can affect their business today? Like, I know that AI's not been out very long, but there has been such dramatic changes over the past 6 months. Give us a sense for how far you are behind if your stance is we're not going to get into this yet. And go ahead, Morty, and then we'll go to Brian.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone is particularly far behind just yet, but I get the sense you're going to be very far behind very quickly, a lot quicker than you would have thought otherwise. So in 18 months, I would imagine that people who are not leveraging some of these systems and have not thought about retooling either people or processes to be able to leverage new services, they're just not going to be able to compete. Meaning, washing machines clean faster than washboards. They just do.
For sure. Brian, what's your thoughts?
I would agree. I think that, particularly if you adopt that McKinsey's framework of this is going to be more, it's not going to be revolutionary insofar as it creates new product lines or drives revenue. It's going to be more productivity increases and doing more with less. I think those types of things can really sneak up on a business. And it's going to be very interesting to watch as some of these case studies start to come out, when we say, hey, we were able to apply AI to such and such a industry or such and such a company. And, like we did with American Family, like we came out and we had these great results with this thing. Once we have done that, and once we had a press release about it and we're talking about it, if you're a competitor, you are now behind, right? Like you need to be looking at it. But, we've created the framework for that, and it's a lot easier to copy that than it is to innovate directly. So I wouldn't say that companies are far behind right now, but it needs to be on their radar, because it is something that could creep up and might, exactly like Morty said, might happen faster than you think.
Excellent. So I have one more question for you guys before we start opening it up to the group, because I'm sure we'll have more questions. I see Isaac's put some questions and stuff in the chat here, but to follow up on that, Brian, you presented some excellent information. One of those things was how the workforce is being affected and how it may be affected in the future. But if you had one prediction for how AI is going to transform businesses in the next decade, let's say, what do you feel like the most impact will be?
For better or for worse, I think it's going to take over customer service entirely. We had a huge shift in the 90s and 2000s and now to offshoring technical support, customer support, things like that. If you've ever tried to cancel your cable subscription, you might as well be talking to an AI already. It would actually probably be a better experience for the customers in a lot of cases. And so I think that some of that frontline customer service is going to be affected pretty quickly. So at 10 Forward, we manage a bunch of different clients' websites and web applications, and we have our own kind of help desk ticketing system. And we're exploring using some artificial intelligence to act as the first person, because we're a small company. All of our staff is highly paid, highly qualified engineers. We don't have anybody making $9 an hour answering phones. And so every minute that we can take away from a developer and just have some bot ask the questions and get the right information and try to reproduce the bug, or, spit out an answer that they, go turn your router off and turn it back on, kind of things like that. But do it in a more intelligent way that doesn't seem so patronizing like the AVR systems are right now. Right. And so I think that would be a no-brainer for me.
For sure. Morty, what's going to be the most impact?
I'll definitely echo the calling the cable company thing, because they already reboot your router for you. You don't even need to go there. But let's put that aside. I think that when the convergence with robotics happens and you have a machine that can move around and act, I wouldn't call it autonomously, but intelligently, as we defined it earlier today, that's going to be a massive, another quantum shift's going to happen. And then you start looking at repeatable processes that can be automated almost intelligently, and the training becomes a lot smarter. So there's just a lot of interesting things that can happen on that front. And then it drives a whole bunch of other questions on agriculture, security and safety, and various other industries that you wouldn't necessarily think would be as impacted.
I do agree. I think one of the biggest impacts we're going to see here coming is more on the consumer side of how much AI will be integrated into the products and stuff that we're buying to try and make smart products out of dumb ones. So fantastic discussion. Okay. So now I'm sure you guys have a lot to say and maybe some questions to ask these guys as well. So please feel free. If you would like to ask a question live, put your hand, raise your hand or whatever, and we'll bring you on live. If you want to ask a question in the chat, feel free to do that too. We'll answer as many as we can get. Also, I've got a whole pocket full of questions if you guys want me to just keep asking questions, so we can go that way too. But if anybody wants to start to kick it off, feel free, raise your hand. Isaac, I know you dropped a couple in there too. So Van, you are the winner. Well, let's start with you and then we'll go to Isaac.
All right. So Brian, the McKinsey diagram you shared, is that applicable both at a micro and a macro level? I can see things within our accounting industry where AI could certainly simplify the processes that have already been coded into simple tax software. But then I start thinking on an industry level, everybody's going to have to do the same thing at some point. Early adopters are going to have, in theory, a higher level of detail. They're going to be able to consider more options than somebody who doesn't have that kind of backup. So I may be rambling a bit, but does it have to start at the micro level for it to work at the macro level?
I mean, I think at the place that we're at right now, I think it does. I think you need to start small with specific use cases and then see if those can generalize. I think that's been one of the big problems with, some of these very large models, is trying to throw too much at AI. People get very excited and they want to say, hey, can you just tackle this? Or, hey, how about nobody file their taxes anymore? We just have an AI file everybody's for them and put the entire industry out of business. I don't think you can start there. I mean, I'm all for it. And it does seem like it should be possible, or at least for a lot of people, to just run what the government has through a thing and say, hey, you probably are fine. But orchestrating something like that from a very high level, I think is going to be difficult. I think more so it'll look like, the H&R Blocks of the world will either go out of business because everybody else, like all the bespoke CPAs, can provide that service that they're providing now for free or nothing, for no marginal cost using AI, and then save the expensive, domain experts to do the things that they do best. And I think that would be more of the model of how it would eventually change an entire industry is, kind of, again, I think it's going to be able to replace the frontline, easiest people. And I think the experts are going to be safe for quite some time.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Van.
Just
Isaac, why don't you jump into one of your questions that you have?
Sure. And I'm not sure, Morty and Brian, if this is quite your wheelhouse, but when you were sharing, Brian, it made it come to mind. So, we've worked with a few companies that they sell an AI product. Sometimes it's integrated with hardware. There's conversations going on with the VC. They're fundraising and getting the seed money and stuff. So when you're talking about the American Family Insurance, and then I was like, oh my goodness, the operational efficiency there is just unbelievable. And the throughput is so much, you can do so much more in less time, like you're saying. So I was wondering if you have any thoughts around how the major increase in all of the various ways that you make your ops more efficient from a technology standpoint, like you have an idea it's engineered, it goes to market, just your regular ops team, the marketing team everybody's more productive internally. And what I think that means is for a short time, you have more money and it's in the higher margins, and then it'll kind of shake out and be different. But regardless, I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts around how that increase of operational efficiency of all departments might impact how a business is valued if they're looking to sell later. Do you have any thoughts about that at all?
I do. I think that there has been a bubble in venture funded companies in America for a very long time. I think they're starting. So I'm involved in the entrepreneurial community here in Madison and around the country. And we've already seen investors tighten up with interest rates being higher, right? Like for the past 20 years, there's been nowhere else to put your money. And now it's starting to look like there is. And so I think some of those valuations are going to come down. What I also think is interesting is there are a lot of tech startups that are based on designing a new AI model and applying it to a specific thing. We use these insurance. There were some that were good at detecting, dents in cars or hail damage on roofs, or these very different specific models. There's a bunch of them that detect fraud risk, right? Like what is the risk that this is fraudulent based on all the data we have about the individual and the filing circumstances and things like that. What I think is the interesting thing is currently those companies are going to those startups to bring them in and bring their point solutions in and then tie that in for the operational efficiency. I think the true revolution here is once these models become more accessible so that you don't have to have, these extremely highly trained data scientists and, data engineers, you can just have normal programmers that your company already has who are writing website stuff, do AI things. I think that is going to have a huge impact on the AI industry. And unfortunately, I think it's going to mean that we're going to probably move towards consolidating, again, more power with these big tech companies, right? Like OpenAI, Microsoft, Google, Amazon. I think they are going to become the go-to brokers, and people are going to start implementing custom solutions for their own business versus buying off-the-shelf software because it's not going to make sense, right?
It's not really all that surprising that the masters of the universe figure out how to stay masters of the universe. Morty, what's your thoughts on the question?
It's interesting. I mean, so long as the model itself becomes predictive based on the data it's trained on, the question is, where does the data come from? So currently, if they're scraping the internet, which is what most people are doing to get data, then when we spoke about this a little earlier, then there's no real ability to gain custom data because your data is private. But if you sign a release to allow everything that lives inside your M365 SharePoint to be screen scraped by Microsoft and then, churned up and spit out into an insurance, pictures, analytics, whatever it is that you're doing, that can potentially be a game changer for allowing a company like Microsoft to create that platform ability, or just to create the platform ability and you upload your data, allow their machines to train it. And much like, 30 years ago, you needed a mail server in your office. Today, you now get someone else to do that platform. This will be some other AI platform as a service.
Donna just posted in, what about applying traditional research with whatever the AI tool provides?
I would love some clarity on that question. What do you mean?
What I mean by that is there's information about certain subjects, and I'll apply this to the medical world. and remedies and whatnot. And so all of the holistic remedies were, thrown away because we wanted to use the other remedies that were being invented. And so if we're going to do some research on something, the AI tool will only provide what we have fed it. And what if we haven't fed this tool all of this, shall we say, ancient wisdom? Well, now we've got to literally go back to the library and dig out the books that had this ancient wisdom that didn't get put into the artificial intelligence, So, yeah, that's what I mean by
Was
that.
it about, how the knowledge base that AI is learning from is the internet, basically, right? And so
Mhm.
there's still all kinds of knowledge and stuff that can be fed into it. Is the question more about how long it will take to incorporate additional learning and learning models and such like that, Donna?
Yes, or will it ever? There's certain information that is just flat out not going to be put in there. And it's only going to be held in a book that, we managed to keep, like, this textbook from 1942 that claims, this is the thing. And somehow the powers to be didn't like that thing. So it never got put into,
So
will it ever be able to learn outside of the internet, maybe?
yeah.
So there's some interesting research going on with that right now for, is there a way to dump audio or video or, your entire company's Google Drive? I think it will be a very long time. When you talk about arcane knowledge that is kept in a library, what about the arcane knowledge that lives down the hall in the closet of your office, right? Like how your organization operates. If you add, like, there is so much stuff that an AI will just not ever know and is just ingrained into like a company culture. And so what I think when you're talking specifically about doing research with AI, I think it will speed up research because it will allow you to get to the more interesting parts faster. All the stuff that's common knowledge, all the stuff that's been written about a ton, you can get it to spit that out right at the beginning. Then you can spend 5 minutes reading it and verifying it instead of 5 hours writing it, and then hop right into the most interesting stuff.
Right. I completely agree with that.
And then the other question obviously becomes, what about prediction? Meaning, if the prediction is based on all the data that the arcane knowledge was in fact accurate, the prediction could in fact point in that direction anyway. So it just depends.
Yeah. And I still believe we have to make sure we're digging down. We're digging down to get to that ancient wisdom that the powers to be have decided, no, we don't believe in that anymore. So therefore we're not going to put that in.
Sure. Go ahead, Isaac.
All right. So Brian, last night I watched this video and it was a guy there that it was like a developer. Okay. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is Brian Sampson's wheelhouse. So I'm so excited. It was today actually. So he draws out there like on a whiteboard, the kind of flow chart they were wanting to develop. He takes a picture, he uploads it to wherever, and it writes the code to do like the user input form and stuff. And I was like, wow. I was thinking about all the conversations I've had with so many people who are so many various roles, from the owners to just the team at the company. They're like, oh, I wish I could do this. Oh, wish I could just have an application that would do this. Oh, wouldn't it be great if I could just do this? But it always stops because the next thing is, yeah, but we don't have like $1 billion to do that. And it never goes anywhere, and their dreams like die on the vine. So my question to you, Brian, is do you feel like that coding and architecture and all the stuff that's involved in that, do you feel like that cost is going to come down enough to where people can actually pull the trigger on their ideas in a not such a financially risky way?
I do. I think it's going to be very powerful for things like that have low complexity and what I would consider to be prototype level tools, right? So I can even see, I don't know if people on the call have experience using Salesforce or PeopleSoft or one of those big, company management systems, but usually the way that you get new workflows and new apps or new tables in there is you pay an expensive Salesforce consultant a bunch of money to come and program Salesforce. I think that is a huge thing that artificial intelligence can and will take over, saying, hey, can you modify this to make it so that quotes that we send to France or anywhere in the European Union get an extra 19% VAT? And then I think that you could have an AI actually go there within the framework of like Salesforce, like a system that it understands, and automate a lot of that away. And then similarly, if you've ever played around with some of these, low code or no code tools that create easy interfaces for existing data sets, I think that AI will be hugely powerful in that, in allowing regular people to come up with new innovative interfaces to existing data. Where I think it'll struggle is if you're trying to solve a business problem that hasn't been solved or you don't have data already, you're still going to need software, and you're still going to need someone who is comfortable jumping in at a level below the AI and fixing an edge case or repairing an issue or understanding what went wrong and making it more reliable. Because right now, the code that the AI writes, it might hit exactly your requirements, but it might not be reliable, and it might not generalize the way that you would think it would. And so I do think that AI programmer or AI engineer is going to be a job role, and I think it will be very powerful. But my guess is that those folks will get just in the weeds as we are when trying to make the computers act right.
For sure. Morty, I'd love to know from a technology services standpoint, how has AI affected your business, maybe with clients, and what do you see coming in the next 6 months?
It's a great question. We are seeing that people are coming back to the office and people are still valuing personal relationships. So to the extent that people want a human being to help them with an issue when they have an issue quickly and rapidly, that's still something that people value. Now, do they value it to the tune of the monies that are going to be required to pay for that kind of resource is an interesting question, and that's going to be TBD, and it'll probably shake out over time. So over time, I think people are going to recognize that certain things can be done more quickly, more efficiently by using AI tools. Just regular stuff. I don't know, having a prescription renewed or whatever the situation may be. But certain other things, I'm going to still want a relationship with someone to take care of it for me. And I can focus on what I'm good at.
Do you feel like it will be carved out almost as a specific focal point of your guys' business within the industry? Like, will there become a specialty of AI within technology service providers?
Yeah, I think Brian said that already. That's happening. That is happening. It's a data scientist programmer. Maybe I'm thinking about this differently, but it's a little bit more in Brian's wheelhouse.
Yeah, good. Okay, well, we just have 2 minutes left. Does anybody have any last minute questions that they would like to get asked or answered, I should say, from Brian or Morty?
I have a quick question in regards to what you guys said about Salesforce and other platforms. Now, when you're talking about AI, it can allow you to write some code pieces, but many of those platforms have 1,000 submenus and different places settings that need to be changed and adjusted. I mean, the AI system doesn't exactly insert into your Salesforce. It's a separate platform that you have to prompt, right? And it gives you a response back. So in the sense of being able to, use AI to program or create workflows and processes in those, essentially you're saying you just use it for that small code piece. Is that, I guess I'm looking for like confirmation of what that statement meant.
I guess what I was alluding to is that the role of Salesforce consultant may entirely go away in the next 10 years. And if Salesforce chooses to add, sufficiently advanced AI technology to open up this behavior, then I think that people who work at your company who are kind of, I saw you in the chat, have, some understanding and can do some things. I think that those same people will be empowered to do much more complex things and much more complex workflows without needing, specializations, because the AI model can specialize. Now, will Salesforce do that or not? Or will they be supplanted by a different company who shows up and decides to do that? Who can say, right? But I think that to your point, like right now, if you wanted to have an AI that integrated with Salesforce and did that, I think it would be a big complicated mess. We have experience integrating with Salesforce, and I think there might be some cool things that you could do with API access. But as far as getting in there and changing the schema and adding views and everything through AI, I don't think that that's probably worth investing in right now. But like I said, over 10 years, that might be the way that all of this software is programmed.
Okay.
Rowan, 2 cents on that one.
Excellent.
And, Microsoft is in fact charging for autopilot when it rolls it out. So, Brian, to your point, I think that's very likely that a Salesforce or any other company that is a big behemoth may charge additional licensing fees for their capabilities of supplanting the expensive consultants. And yes, 10 years is a long time, and a lot will change over that time. But in the much shorter term, it will allow you to buy a license to kind of modify stuff yourself in the platform using their own tools, or the Salesforce tools in this example.
Fantastic. Excellent conversation, you guys. Thank you. Brian, thank you for a great presentation, for the information that you brought to us today. Morty, thank you for adding for the value to that.